President Trump is leaning into immigration in his first week in office, authorizing arrests at sensitive locations like schools, churches, and pausing refugee admissions. And now, Trump's press secretary Caroline Leavitt posting these pictures on X showing what his administration claims are migrants who entered the U.S. illegally in handcuffs being flown out of the country using military aircraft. Trump's border czar Tom Homan says they've arrested 1,300 people across the country, claiming 1,000 are criminals. News Nation's Alex Capriello has the latest on Trump's big city deportation operations.
Hi there, Julia. Border czar Tom Homan appearing exclusively with News Nation's Chris Cuomo, commending the hard work of Immigration and Customs Enforcement and sharing some hard data about arrests that have happened within these first few days of the Trump administration. Homan says ICE agents have arrested more than 1,300 undocumented immigrants, which includes more than 1,000 criminals. The other 300 or so are what he calls collateral damage, illegal aliens who may not be public safety threats, but were arrested by being in proximity to their operations within immigrant neighborhoods. These targeted ICE operations have been happening all across the country, including in many sanctuary cities. Homan says he hopes sanctuary cities begin to see the progress they're making and allow ICE agents into county jails to arrest violent criminals and public safety threats. He says that would reduce the collateral damage by ensuring they're focusing their arrests on men and women who have broken U.S. laws.
They're not letting us in the county jail because of sanctuary laws. If we could arrest the bad guy in the safety and security of a jail, which is safer for the officers, safer for the aliens, safer for the community, then there'd be a lot less of those type, like you just said, low-level offenders. There'd be a lot less of them arrested. But when you force us in the community, we're going to find that guy sooner or later.
One ICE raid in Newark, New Jersey on Thursday has drawn criticism. Employees at a seafood restaurant say that ICE agents showed up unannounced and without a warrant, demanding documentation from employees and taking 3 people into custody. ICE agents say they were performing a targeted enforcement operation. But the mayor of Newark says one of the men detained is an alleged American citizen and war veteran. The outraged mayor writes, quote, "One of the detainees is a U.S. military veteran who suffered the indignity of having the legitimacy of his military documentation questioned. Newark will not stand by idly while people are being unlawfully terrorized." Democratic U.S. Senators Andy Kim and Cory Booker, both from New Jersey, have criticized that ICE raid, saying this is an example of the Republican Party sowing fear into the hearts of immigrant families all across the country. For News Nation, I'm Alex Capriello.
News Nation's Alex Capriello, thank you so much. Since taking office on Monday, President Trump has signed 30 executive orders, 26 of those in his first day in the White House. The orders have included securing the U.S.-Mexico border, issuing guidance to the State Department on foreign policy, and ending funding for federal diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. Trump also limited the disbursement of funds from former President Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, a move that could have had sweeping impacts to billions of dollars meant for projects in Republican states and districts. Now, the White House Office of Management and Budget has issued new guidance this week to help clarify specifically what will be targeted in Trump's executive order. Joining me now is the Hill's congressional reporter, Mychael Schnell. Mychael, as always, it's great to see you. Look, it looks like a lot of these major targets of the funds are related to climate change, mitigation, and incentives for electric vehicle charging. Could money meant for Republican states get in the middle of these cuts?
It's entirely possible, and we've seen some concern about this executive order from some Republican lawmakers, because remember, the Inflation Reduction Act, there were provisions in there that benefited both red states and blue states. So we're hearing from some folks who are concerned about this. But look, I think that there's a question of how will the courts deal with this? Will this get tied up at all? Also, the tailoring of the executive order to just include the climate change and the the electric vehicle provisions. That's interesting because we know that Republicans up on Capitol Hill are looking to hack away at a lot of different parts of the Inflation Reduction Act. So it's interesting to see how the OMB had tailored this portion, this executive order, especially as we talk about Inflation Reduction Act rollbacks in the coming months.
I want to switch gears. The Senate is set to hold a late-night confirmation vote on Defense Secretary nominee Pete Hegseth. I want to take a listen at what President Trump had to say this morning. This after two Republicans, Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, came out against Hegseth. Let's take a look.
Pete's a very, very good man. I hope he makes it. I was very surprised that Collins and Murkowski would do that.
Now, it's important to note that even though every other Republican besides those two voted to advance the nomination, theoretically, they could still vote against Hegseth. Tom Tillis seems to be one everyone's watching. Any rumblings about any potential defectors, or is he a shoo-in at this point?
I mean, it's still up in the air, right? Because you never know how folks are going to vote until they actually cast that vote. You mentioned Tom Tillis. He made clear that he was voting to advance this nomination, but that wasn't particularly his final say. There's somebody like Mitch McConnell who hasn't said where they stand on the final confirmation of Pete Hegseth. So I wouldn't say it's tied up yet, but he's looking to be in pretty good shape. As you mentioned, Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski were the only two Republicans who voted against advancing that nomination yesterday. That's a good sign for him. But again, not wrapped up until this thing finally happens. Capitol Hill, things are always changing at the last minute.
Absolutely, all up in the air. Speaking of Capitol Hill and nominations, Homeland Security Secretary pick Kristi Noem, there's going to be a cloture vote on her nomination this evening, obviously with the hopes of confirmation could happen as early as Sunday morning. John Thune, the Senate Majority Leader, is keeping his promise to push nominees through as fast as possible. What do we expect to play out with this nomination in particular?
I think that Kristi Noem is probably going to be safe, right? She's not one of those core groupings of folks who we've been talking a lot about, the more controversial nominees. Pete Hegseth, RFK Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, Kash Patel, those are the people we've spoken about. Kristi Noem has not been in that group, so I suspect that she will have a pretty safe and easy way skating through. But this is an important confirmation because we know that we've spoken a lot about what President Trump has vowed to do with the situation at the southern border and immigration. Kristi Noem is going to have a strong hand in that. So this is a key part of his cabinet. So it's going to be interesting to see how that vote shakes out and then how she starts hitting the ground running because, again, immigration, the border is just such a central part of Trump's agenda.
You mentioned Kash Patel and Tulsi Gabbard. They both have their confirmation hearing set for January 30th. Obviously, both seen as controversial. Have we heard any pushback from Republicans, and are their nominations seen as in jeopardy?
We've definitely heard some people on the fence. Right? We haven't heard any complete no's yet, or maybe not yet, but we haven't heard any complete no's up to this point. But there's certainly some skepticism and some concerns being expressed behind closed doors, particularly Tulsi Gabbard. There was that 2017 trip to meet with Bashar al-Assad and the former Syrian leader. There were comments that she has made that sort of parroted things or echoed things that people like Vladimir Putin were saying about the Russia-Ukraine war. There is this concern about her, but then there's the question of how many of these Trump nominees are these Republican senators willing to vote against. Collins and Murkowski took a big step yesterday in saying that they were not going to vote to confirm Pete Hegseth. How many times are they willing to do that is the first question. And the second question is, will anyone else join them? Murkowski and Collins, I know Trump said he was surprised that they voted against Pete Hegseth, but it really shouldn't be much of a surprise. These are two individuals who openly said they did not vote for Trump in the 2024 election, who voted to impeach him after the 2021 attack on the Capitol, who are no big fans of his. So I'm curious to see, A, if those two are willing to buck the party on more nominees going forward, and if anyone joins the fray on some of these particularly controversial folks.
Moving to the Republican side of the House of Representatives, we know that House Republicans are heading to Trump's Doral Resort next week. They want to talk about that one big, beautiful bill we've heard so much about. We know that they probably won't leave with a deal in place, but what are they looking to accomplish during this visit?
So this piece of legislation, I spoke to Mike Johnson about this yesterday, the Speaker of the House. This piece of legislation is such a sprawling package. It's going to include a lot, extending those 2017 Trump's tax cuts, immigration policy, energy policy. There's going to be so much in here potentially. The debt limit, though, it's looking unlikely. There's going to be so much in here. They need to figure out what exactly to put in there. The thing with reconciliation is you can only do it a few times a year, A. And B is that how many times are you really going to be able to corral all Republicans together for one thing? There is no room for error here, particularly in the House, where Republicans are grappling with such a slim majority. So House Republicans have been having listening sessions now for weeks, talking about what policy they're going to put in there, and then also what spending cuts they're going to make. There are a number of hardline House conservatives, Chip Roy is one of them, who are saying that if this package is not deficit neutral or better, if it adds to the deficit even a little bit, I'm not going to vote for it. Now that's huge because that's A, a red line, and you can't deal with any red lines when you have such this slim majority. B, where are you going to find those spending cuts that would make this sprawling package deficit neutral? And C, will those spending cuts upset some moderate lawmakers? This is a seesaw that Mike Johnson is going to have to balance perfectly. in order to get to that goal, he's going to be having a lot of those conversations next week.
I want to stick in that same, I guess, seesaw vein. Congressional GOP leaders are in a bind over how to handle the upcoming debt ceiling decision or deadline to raise the debt ceiling. What's at stake here? Do we expect these fiscal hawks like Chip Roy to really sort of throw around their weight here?
Yes. The short answer is yes. There is a handful of Republicans up on Capitol Hill who have just never voted for a debt limit increase, and they are not particularly interested in breaking that record. Initially, this debt limit increase was supposed to go in the reconciliation package. Speaker Johnson said that was his expectation. I spoke to him in recent weeks. He said that, he's open to other ideas, sort of creating that off-ramp to strip the debt limit out of the reconciliation package. The debt limit was seen as one of the thorniest parts of this legislation. So now there are a few different avenues they can go. They can do it with government funding around that March 14th deadline, where they can pair it with disaster relief funding, though those things would need to get buy-in from Democrats, and Democrats are saying that a lot of those ideas are a non-starter. So this is going to be interesting. Again, we knew this was going to be a problem. We knew that the U.S. was going to hit its debt limit and have to deal with it. This Congress, it's always thorny, it's always difficult, and it's coming out to be the same situation this time around.
Before we let you go, Michael, Republican Congressman Andy Ogles proposed an amendment to the Constitution that would allow President Trump to serve a third term. How likely is this?
It's not happening.
Yeah, it's not happening.
It's not happening. I mean, in order to get a constitutional amendment like that, you would need a 2/3 support in chambers.
Right.
You would need 3/4 of the states to approve it. Highly unlikely. But Andy Ogles, someone who's in the Conservative House Freedom Caucus, strong ally of President Trump. A lot of folks seems like they're trying to curry favor with Trump right now, get on his good side as he gets settled into the White House. I think this is one of those things. Trump recently joked about what if he got a third term, but again, I mean, this would be a very uphill climb that has virtually no chance of happening.
A very public show of support indeed. Mychael Schnell, our congressional reporter, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Julia.
It's the Gulf of Mexico, not the Gulf of America. That's the standard that the Associated Press says they will be adhering to in their news coverage. President Trump signed an executive order on Monday to change the name. AP noted that Trump's order only applies to the U.S., not Mexico or other international bodies. They say they will refer to it by its original name and acknowledge the new Trump-given name. Trump also changed the name of Alaska's Mount Denali back to Mount McKinley. AP will use that new name. Former President Obama had changed it to Mount Denali back in 2015 to honor the name used by Indigenous Americans. It was previously known after former President William McKinley. Just under 2 months since a ceasefire was agreed upon in Lebanon, the IDF is now saying they will not withdraw from the country before the ceasefire deadline. Israel says forces will remain in southern Lebanon past the 60-day withdrawal deadline. That time frame was set during negotiations with Hezbollah, who say the latest move by Israel is a blatant violation of the agreement. Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the delay is because parts of the ceasefire agreement had not yet been fully enforced by Lebanese state. He says the withdrawal will gradually continue. Hezbollah urged Lebanon's political leadership in a statement Thursday to pressure the ceasefire sponsors to act effectively to ensure withdrawal by the full deadline. In Gaza, Hamas has published the names of 4 female Israeli hostages who will be released tomorrow, in accordance with the ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. Those 4 individuals will be released in exchange for dozens of Palestinians who have been imprisoned by Israel. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Julia Manchester. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hill's YouTube channel. And come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.